What's up everyone, Tony here, and today we are wrapping up my 3-part video series on the perfect Marvel vs. Capcom 4 roster. It's the big one. We'll be taking a look at Marvel itself. What has changed with the Marvel brand since Marvel Infinite's release, and how will these changes impact which characters make it onto the roster? If you haven't already, be sure to check out Part 1 for an overall outline of the game and its various systems, and Part 2 for the Capcom side of the roster. But let's not waste any more time and get right into Marvel. For obvious reasons, the logic behind choosing Marvel characters differs greatly from my Capcom logic. As we went over last time, Capcom has exactly one new project in development that we officially know of. Marvel, on the other hand, has many, and probably a bunch that are unannounced too. So before we even start choosing characters, let's be clear about something. Your favorite character might get snubbed from the base roster. Don't worry. There are a lot of popular, important Marvel characters, and only so many spots we can realistically have on the base roster. This is a good problem to have. Let's be honest here, the Marvel side is going to be doing a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to DLC. And that's just another reason why I think this franchise specifically would absolutely thrive in this new era of games as a service. Your favorite character will make it in at some point. Chill. Okay, with that in mind, let's get into the logic for my choices today. First things first, we have the Marvel Cinematic Universe. You know, it's only the biggest thing in the world of fiction. The MCU has been around for over 10 years at this point, and here in 2021, it's bigger than ever. Above all else, the Marvel Cinematic Universe and which characters are featured on the big screen will paint a picture of which characters will make the cut for Marvel 4. Now you might be thinking, wait a minute, Marvel Infinite's character roster was also married to the MCU, and it was bad, really bad. Well, as I already covered in the first video, that game fell into a very awkward time window where the X-Men and Fantastic Four could not be used. Today, that ban no longer exists. Also, since Marvel Infinite's release, we've seen a ton of new, interesting characters join the MCU, and even more will be joining it soon, with a number of those projects already announced. We also have characters that have been in the MCU for years elevated to new heights with starring roles in their own movies or shows. And of course, we have the whole multiverse aspect of MCU Phase 4. Variants and all the potential unlocked by the multiverse will absolutely be playing a role in this video when choosing the roster and potential assists or DLC characters. So at the very highest priority level, we have the MCU. If you are in the MCU or you're coming soon to the MCU, you are most likely to make it onto the roster. It only makes sense to push characters in this game that are also featured in the biggest movie franchise in history. For DLC, it only makes sense to market a new character being added to the game alongside a massive new film or TV series with its own mega marketing campaign behind it. We really need to look no further than Fortnite, and even Marvel's Avengers. This is just basic stuff, and if you think the roster is in any way limited by focusing primarily on the MCU and its characters, well, I'm happy to tell you that you're wrong, and you should not be worried at all. One step below the MCU, we have the characters featured in prior Marvel vs. Capcom titles, the characters that define Marvel and the Versus series. As this title is a make-good, I would hope a spotlight is shined on some of these fan-favorite characters, almost like an apology for dropping the ball on the last game and leaving them out. Even if there are no MCU projects involving these characters coming in the near future, I think it is extremely important to have them on the base roster as a make-good for the last game and a celebration of the series' legacy. Finally, we should also take a look at the characters that have received featured roles in other video games. We know at the end of the day that Marvel has the final say for who is or is not featured on this roster. While I can only assume there would be a focus on prominently featured MCU characters, and I can only pray characters from past Marvel titles make the cut, we can look at other popular games on the market for an idea of what characters may be featured in Marvel vs. Capcom 4. Fortnite, Marvel Spider-Man, Guardians of the Galaxy, Avengers, and Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3 all come to mind. These games all feature a number of Marvel characters in video game form that ultimately got the okay from Marvel. So to me, if they made it into these titles, they're absolutely fair game for Marvel vs. Capcom 4. Fortnite especially is an interesting one to me. If a Marvel character is in Fortnite and Marvel wants them in front of that massive, younger mainstream audience, there's a reason for that. That's a huge spotlight being put on that character. I know for a fact that a number of Fortnite players were introduced to Doctor Doom and the Silver Surfer for the very first time when they were added to that game. And so with all of that in mind, let's get into our choices for the base roster. Right off the top, let's get some absolute shoo-ins out of the way. We have Iron Man, Thor, Captain Marvel, Black Panther, Hulk, Captain America, Doctor Strange, Rocket Raccoon, Thanos, Black Widow, and Spider-Man. Now, you'll see I've specified a lot of those choices with a second name, and the reason for that, I think, should be clear. Over the years in Marvel Comics, and now in the MCU, we've seen the various superhero mantles handed off to other people. Iron Man, Thor, Captain America, Black Widow, Spider-Man, the list goes on. There is not just one of each. However, my logic for choosing these versions of the characters, once again, comes down to the MCU. We have Jane Foster appearing as Thor in the upcoming Thor Love and Thunder, but it's the male Odinson, played by Chris Hemsworth, that's been a staple in this universe for 10 years. Same deal with Black Widow, and same with Iron Man. I love Miles Morales, but the kid has yet to make his debut in the MCU. At this point, I simply don't see them placing him on the roster over Peter Parker. That said, I would be totally okay with the next generation taking some of these slots. In either case, we should get every character we see here at the end of the day, though I'm not sure if it's a great look to see the same character twice, all over the place, on the base roster. So on that note, let's talk a bit about DLC here. With all of these characters, regardless of who makes the base roster, I would like to see their counterpart, variant if you will, appear eventually as DLC. Preferably as playable characters, but at the very least, as assists. Now, you're probably thinking, I don't want to spend money on clones. And no, you're right, that would not be an easy sell. But here's the thing, they don't have to be clones. This ain't 2000, and we ain't looking at another Bone Claw situation here. Let's look at someone like Miles Morales. Just play his game if you haven't already. Outside of a few staples of the character like web swinging and web shots, the potential is absolutely there for a second Spider-Man to be playable, while also having a completely unique moveset from the other one. Just look at his Venom abilities from the game. You could build Miles' moveset with that in mind, and have it differ completely from the Peter Parker moveset. And that applies to all of these variants. So for all of the shoo-ins we see on the base roster, I also want to present some shoo-in DLC. Based on the upcoming MCU schedule, all of these characters are set to play big roles in the MCU going forward, so I'd hope to see them represented in MVC4, rolling out as DLC as they make their big screen debuts. Oh yeah, there's one more shoo-in I almost forgot to mention.
This one's for you, Marv.
That's right. Logan isn't waiting for anything. He's making it onto the base roster, MCU be damned. Okay, so with all of those shoo-ins out of the way, let's get into some newcomers. And first on the list is Loki. I think Loki is long overdue for an appearance in Marvel. He was the MCU villain for the longest time, really until Thanos came in and became the undisputed final boss of the Marvel Universe. I felt he should have been in Marvel 3, and definitely Marvel Infinite, but it never came to be. Now with a starring role in his own Disney Plus show, we are out of excuses. He's an absolute must for any Marvel roster going forward. Hiddleston's Loki is so damn beloved, and a trickster with an illusion-based moveset will be so awesome in Marvel. There's potential here for a character that plays totally different from anyone we've ever seen in the Versus series. Make it happen. Of course, Loki also introduced the concept of variants to the masses, and with that, a number of Loki variants. Just look at it. It's beautiful. Shows like this should be treated like gold for Capcom and whoever is in charge of adding content to a Marvel vs. Capcom game. Maybe they weren't quite featured enough to deserve playable character status, but a classic Loki costume, Sylvie assist, an alligator Loki assist, broken. Just take my money, Capcom, take it all. Speaking of Loki, the show also introduced a character that looks to be the next big villain of Marvel's Phase 4, and that is Kang the Conqueror. I have no idea what this dude's moveset will look like in a fighting game, but that's what makes it so damn exciting. I trust Marvel and Capcom could come together to bring this character to life in a very interesting way. Then for story mode purposes, you'd have to figure Kang would be the main villain behind bringing together the Marvel and Capcom universes. With such a major focus in the MCU to come, and an appearance in Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania already confirmed, I can't see Kang not making the cut here. Next up, we have Captain America. But wait, I already have Cap on the roster. Well, friends, this is the one exception to my rule from earlier. We are getting 2 Captain Americas on the base roster for Marvel 4, both Steve Rogers and Sam Wilson. The reason for this is pretty simple. Sam Wilson has already been the star of his own show in the MCU, while the other variants I mentioned earlier have not. Also, we know Sam Wilson's moveset would be totally unique compared to Rogers simply because of his Falcon abilities. The shield would obviously be there, but other than that, there'd be very little crossover between the two characters when it comes to moves. The wings, his Red Wing drone, these would make him totally unique, and I think Anthony Mackie's portrayal of the character is so beloved at this point that I'd be really disappointed if he didn't make the cut for the base roster. On a related note, I think now may be a good time to talk about character likenesses. I've already covered the realistic art style in part 1 and how the game has to look more like God of War or Mortal Kombat when it comes to character faces and not awkward looking stuntmen in Halloween costumes. Well, what better way to achieve that than by scanning the faces of the MCU actors and using their likenesses in the game directly. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I don't know what the logistics are with something like this. But let's look at the other major Disney property. I boot up a Star Wars game, and that's Mark Hamill, that's Daisy Ridley, that's Harrison Ford. Star Wars games get the actor's likeness, so why not Marvel? If it's an MCU thing specifically, then tell me how Hot Toys can acquire each actor's likeness and put out amazing looking products like this. I find it hard to believe that a toy company from Hong Kong can manage this, but a AAA video game company that has been in a relationship with Marvel for close to 30 years cannot. If you want to sell this game to the masses, to the gigantic audience that loves the MCU, the characters, and the actors that play them, you have to get those likenesses. Plaster them all over marketing and on the box. If necessary, at least sell MCU accurate looks as DLC. Even Marvel's Avengers has been able to get the MCU accurate costumes, and they look great. The actors' likenesses and MCU accurate costumes are something I, and I'm sure many others, would be more than willing to pay extra for. Whatever the case, just figure something out. Please. Okay, fanboy dreaming over, let's continue with the roster. Next up, we have a character where after watching his movie, all I could think was, my god, this dude would be perfect in Marvel vs. Capcom. Just perfect. And that is Shang-Chi. Shang-Chi has the best fight scenes in the entire history of the MCU. Straight up. Just watch the movie and the moveset potential for this character becomes clear very, very quickly. This is an easy choice to me. Wenwu would be awesome as DLC too, or at the very least an assist. We have a lot of really good assist potential from this movie too. What a good movie. Finally, to wrap up our section here on the newest superstars of the MCU, we have Scarlet Witch. With WandaVision, Wanda was elevated from a second-tier background player who was lucky to get 10 minutes of screen time to a legitimate star of the MCU. With her full-on transformation into the Scarlet Witch and her upcoming role in Doctor Strange 2, Wanda feels like an absolute slam dunk as a part of the Marvel 4 roster. Also, even if this isn't the case for the MCU iteration of the character, she is Magneto's daughter, and if her moveset even has shades of Magnus, we could be looking at one of the best characters in the game. Just saying. Nevertheless, Wanda could easily stand on her own with a totally unique and downright crazy moveset. I'd love to see her summon characters or objects that reference retro television like we saw on WandaVision. She could basically brainwash random bodies and turn them into her own personal zombies that could be sent to attack the opponent. And then, of course, you have the red stuff. Chaos magic, hypnosis, telekinesis, easy fighting game stuff right here. Story-wise, things can get really interesting with Wanda. There's speculation she might be the main villain of Multiverse of Madness, so I could actually see a scenario in the story where she starts on the hero side, then loses control somehow and becomes one of the big villains in the game's story. Wanda really feels like such an important character now, and I think she's absolutely deserving of a spot in Marvel vs. Capcom. Of course, Vision could be DLC, we could get a Ralph Boner assist, and get the song in the game. This next section is going to focus on characters that will be joining the MCU in the future, and for most of them, the marketing push has already begun. First up is Blade. Hard to believe it's been 23 years since that 1998 movie, which was arguably the first blockbuster success for a Marvel property. In a way, this entire superhero movie MCU phenomenon can be traced back to Blade. Either way, Mahershala Ali will be taking the leading role as Eric Brooks in the MCU, and whenever this movie does come out, I expect it to completely kick ass. Blade has already made his first teaser appearance in the MCU in the post-credit scene of Eternals, he's popped up in Fortnite, and in Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3, so I'd fully expect him to be a playable character in Marvel 4. Next up, we have Miss Marvel. Kamala Khan absolutely feels like one of the most popular Marvel characters yet to make their debut in the MCU. She's the main character in Marvel's Avengers, and by the way, for those who haven't played the game, her moveset is awesome, and it is so damn satisfying to punch people with this character. Then she has her very own Disney Plus series coming in 2022, which will lead into the Captain Marvel sequel, Marvels, in 2023. Kamala is looking to become a super important character for Marvel going forward, so I think it's virtually guaranteed she makes it onto the base roster for this game. Let's be completely honest, her moveset potential is endless. You can never go wrong with a stretchy limb fighting game character. Up next is She-Hulk, who made her Versus Series debut in Marvel 3, but then did not make the cut for Marvel Infinite. Expect this mistake to be corrected with Marvel 4, as Jenny from the Block has her own Disney Plus show in the works, set for release in 2022. Also, she passes the Fortnite test, so you know Marvel wants She-Hulk in front of the biggest audience possible before her big MCU debut. She was a totally unique character in Marvel 3 with a super unorthodox moveset, so I hope to see her return in Marvel 4. Finally, we have a villain you might not expect, and that is the Green Goblin. As I write this, we are mere weeks away from the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films crossing over into the MCU with No Way Home, and thus Norman Osborn will finally join the MCU. No more excuses, it's time for this absolute legend to join Marvel. Now look, even the MCU aside, it has always baffled me that the Green Goblin has never made it into the Versus series. Kind of like Dr. Wily on the Capcom side, this is the main villain of one of the most popular characters in all of Marvel. Probably the most popular Marvel character. Spider-Man's most famous adversary should absolutely be playable in Marvel vs. Capcom, and now that he's going to be in the MCU, it's time. His tech, pumpkin bombs, glider, all prime fighting game moveset material. Doc Ock also works in this slot, honestly. Just give us some more Spider-Man villains, please. We now reach the final 4 characters on the roster. I call this section the make goods. No, they're not in the MCU yet, but their names are synonymous with Marvel, and as far as I'm concerned, the fact that they weren't in Marvel Infinite basically killed the game before it was even born. While it's obviously important to have all of the modern, popular characters on the roster, Capcom also needs to pay respect to the characters that carried the franchise for decades before the MCU was even a twinkle in Kevin Feige's eye. These are the characters that have dominated the game's competitive scene for years and years and filled arcades around the world with now iconic sound effects.
Disruptor! Gravity squeeze! You are defeated!
There is zero question. They should absolutely be on this roster from the get-go. Of course, you all know who I'm talking about. Magneto, Storm, Sentinel, and Doctor Doom. All of these characters embody the spirit of the Versus series. Flashy combos, speedy movement that no mere mortal can keep up with, flight, unflight, projectiles, supers that take up the entire screen. It also helps that they're longtime superstars of Marvel Comics, and it's only a matter of time before they all make their debut in the MCU. 3 of them already passed the Fortnite test. We're looking at some of the all-time great Marvel villains and my personal favorite female character in Marvel history. I love the MCU, and I'm more than okay with the majority of the roster being based off that lineup, but there are always exceptions to the rule, and these 4 characters are absolute musts for a Marvel 4 roster and deserve to be there in celebration of the Versus series' great history. And so, we have our 25 base roster Marvel characters selected. How does it look? I think we've struck a good balance here between MCU representation, Versus series representation, and just representing the entire history of Marvel Comics as a whole. But wait, before you yell at me in the comments for not including your favorite, let's go over some more Marvel DLC ideas on top of all the names I've mentioned so far in this video. If we're going to be talking about effective DLC, we need to look at Fortnite, the god of effective DLC releases. This is not an arguable point. Just how is Fortnite able to accomplish this? Well, Epic is able to consistently take advantage of events happening outside of the game and capitalize by selling related skins. The NBA season starting? Here's some basketball DLC. DC Fandom just took place? Here's all of our DC skins. And of course, if there's a big new movie coming out, you better believe its release is going to come alongside some Fortnite DLC. Even Marvel themselves have benefited from this. In fact, as I was writing this video, it happened a bunch of times. A Shang-Chi skin was released alongside the Shang-Chi movie, Venom and Carnage appeared alongside the release of Venom 2, and now Fortnite has just released an entirely new season centered around Spider-Man just before the release of basically the biggest movie since Endgame. Of course, this is just a drop in the ocean. These cross-promotional skin releases have happened many, many other times over the years as well. Fortnite is living proof that this kind of co-marketing works, and there is absolutely no reason at all that a Marvel vs. Capcom 4 couldn't also release DLC characters alongside a big new Marvel movie or TV show release, or a game release, or why not a comic release. As we look at the rest of Marvel's 2021 calendar, I see Hawkeye, Eternals, and Spider-Man No Way Home. I think it goes without saying that both Hawkeye and Kate Bishop would be perfect additions to the roster alongside the release of this show. Then we have Eternals, which honestly is a bit tougher since it features so many characters. But just looking at the trailer, I see a bunch of potential for fighting game character movesets. We've seen the fighters of the group, and I don't think you could really go wrong with any of them. Icarus basically comes off as the MCU version of Superman, and we could definitely use that in Marvel vs. Capcom. Then we have the big one, Spider-Man No Way Home. The potential really is endless here. When that multiverse opens up, we have tons of villains on the table, as well as some of the most beloved iterations of Spider-Man ever. At the very least, I'd want to see some Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield inspired Spider-Man skins, But honestly, I think they could even pull off Toby's Spidey as a full-on separate character if they really wanted to. It'll take a bit of creativity, but like I said before with Miles, just because it's the same character, that doesn't mean it has to be a clone. Use the movies as a reference and form his moveset, supers, dialogue, and overall style accordingly.
They love me.
Base roster Peter Parker Spidey could lean into the Tom Holland iteration and incorporate some of his Stark tech, while obviously a Tobey Maguire-based Spidey would have a much more grounded style. I could go on forever here. We see the upcoming release schedule for the MCU. It's massive. The potential for new DLC, whether it's a playable character, assists, outfits, stages, whatever. It's never ending. And of course, they don't just need to release DLC that coincides with the release of a new TV show or movie. If there's ever a slow point in the schedule, Capcom can always pluck from the series past for DLC material. While there's no upcoming projects that are confirmed to feature these characters, I don't think anyone would complain about favorites of the past like Nova, Gambit, or Dormammu making a comeback. Packs could be themed as well. Variant packs could feature new twists on characters we already have playable. I don't think anyone would be opposed to an Into the Spider-Verse themed pack that brought Spider-Gwen and Miles Morales to the game. How about a Peter Porker assist? And we can never forget the series' roots. These are comic book characters and comic book movies. If Jonathan Hickman is putting out a new series of comics, why not honor him with a Secret Wars themed DLC pack? We could get a playable Maker, God Emperor Doom skin, Thanos' Black Order as assists, maybe a Battle World stage? Hickman's X-Men taught us that Scott Summers, Jean Grey, and Wolverine make quite the threesome, if you know what I mean. That's right, a perfect team in a 3v3 fighter like Marvel vs. Capcom. Fortnite is living proof that if you could dream it, it could happen. Imagine going back 5 years and showing someone the full roster of characters in this game. I could do the Macarena as Thanos, while John Wick shoots at Wolverine and Batman. I enjoy Fortnite, but I don't love it like I love the Versus series. If a Marvel vs. Capcom 4 came out and was given the same kind of leeway with its new content additions, the same kind of regular, frequent post-launch support, and the ability to line up new DLC with a big movie or TV show release, I would be a very, very happy boy. I just want to reach a point where no character is off limits. And if all sides could come together in harmony, kind of like we see with Fortnite, I think it just might happen. This is all I want, kids. There's no reason a Marvel vs. Capcom 4 roster couldn't provide this kind of joy and excitement, as long as Marvel and Capcom can come together with a great vision and nail the execution. I hope the ideas I presented in these 3 videos are realized to some extent, and the end result is a great game that both longtime fans and new players can all play and enjoy together. And with that, we are going to wrap it up for my 3-part series on the perfect Marvel vs. Capcom 4. In case you haven't noticed by now, I really like Marvel and Capcom, and Marvel vs. Capcom. Trying to work out all the logistics and paint a picture of my personal dream games is a lot of fun. If you like this video and want to see more like it, whether it's Marvel related specifically, or just similar videos where I let out all my fanboy dreams for an hour, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. It took a lot of time and a lot of research, but I loved making these videos and I'd like to do it again. As per my trusted sources who know these things, Marvel 4 is in the works at Capcom, but it's still very early days. It's supposedly on track to release sometime after Street Fighter 6, which we haven't seen yet. Though we do know Street Fighter 5 is officially a wrap, and only now is Capcom only starting to give these little baby teases in the direction of Street Fighter 6. Is a 2022 release possible? Maybe? Of course, you need to consider the pandemic. Who the hell knows how badly COVID threw a wrench into the whole schedule. Honestly, I don't care how long it takes, as long as both Marvel and Capcom still believe in the series and are committed to getting it right this time, I'm happy. Either way, we have plenty of Marvel and Capcom greatness to enjoy in the meantime, so until next time, thanks so much for watching everyone, and take care. Bye.